Now up, planning for organizational flexibility in the time of COVID with Dr. Ben Skipper.
Hi, I'm Dr. Ben Skipper. I'm the Executive Director of Aerospace and Defense Programs and a lecturer of Supply Chain Management at the University of Tennessee. I'm very proud to be here with you today to talk about a subject that's near and dear to many of our hearts and how we deal with these things called supply chain disruptions. And it has been argued often that one way to do that is to increase our organization's flexibility. So what I hope to do today is to talk about a few disruptions and then one way that we might approach this problem. So what could possibly go wrong in existing supply chains? Well, as many of us know, these problems wait for us, it seems, to jump out and grab us at the most inopportune moments. And one of my favorite examples is with the Ford F-150 line of vehicles. And here we have a multi-year design with a well-crafted supply chain. Most of the problems have been worked out at this point. It's considered by many to be the best-selling pickup in the country until we have a fire at a magnesium plant that is a primary supplier to all of the Ford F-150 models. It leads to a manufacturing and assembly shutdown. Ford is down to a 2-month supply of some parts. Many others, they're completely stocked out. And most importantly, they are stocked out of their highest end model, the model that has the most margin contribution in it for a period of time. So here we have a critical supplier that's had a problem. Ford's, again, thought they had their supply chain all worked out. An issue at a very small supplier, although a critical one, leads them in a situation where they have limited options, and it has fairly significant long-term impact with very few options to turn around and be able to do anything about it. This is not the only one. Of course, there are many examples, whether it be a weather event, hurricanes, typhoons, and volcanoes. Oh my, who would ever thought that a volcanic eruption in Iceland would produce so much ash that it impacts the ships that sail across the North Atlantic's ability to use GPS to navigate. And it actually did. It changed the shipping routes and it changed their ability to navigate in open seas. How about that? Whether it be a large player like Hanjin that faltered a couple of years ago, one of the largest shipping lines in the world, whether it be a driver shortage, which we see potentially coming here in the United States or may already be here in the United States. Could it be even rail capacity, and that we don't necessarily have the right type of rail lines going into our seaports so that we can move significant amounts of cargo from point A to point B. Could be a technology success that actually caused a problem, or it could be more likely a technology failure that causes our issue, or a data breach of some kind. If you noticed the picture in the upper right of the screen, that's not a typo on my part. That's actually an apology in a print ad with a long description of what happened that ran in Great Britain when Kentucky Fried Chicken runs into a problem where they changed suppliers. One of their primary suppliers led to a fairly significant disruption, and this impact in the UK led to a 5% global operating profit issue for Kentucky Fried Chicken. They just changed one of their trusted suppliers, and they ran into a very significant supply chain disruption. And these disruptions have been linked to a decrease in shareholder value in a number of studies across the board, regardless of industry or market. And certainly, as many would know in the business of DoD, that can impact the mission immediately. And now, if normal supply chain disruptions weren't enough, here's our friend COVID-19, and it is a little bit different, right? We've talked about the impact of some fairly significant supply chain disruptions in the previous slide, but COVID adds the bonus of being industry spanning in that it crosses all suppliers and all customers at the same time. It does not care if you are a large business, a small business, a big supplier, a big customer. It has the impact to affect everyone at the same time. It is geography spanning. In many supply chain disruptions, the immediate answer, and for companies that have the capacity and the ability to pivot into a new or different region, they may have to spend a little more money, but they can get into additional capacity and use a different supplier. But in this case, COVID is everywhere all at once. And then it's market spanning in that it's not specific to a particular type of good or a particular type of service. This is not the example from Ford where where the fire in the magnesium plant affected that very, very particular type of part. This is all goods and services. This is all parts potentially at the same time. And then the duration, which is seemingly forever, has had a lasting and changing impact on our supply chains. And so why does this happen? How do we find ourselves in this position? Surely COVID is a massive and significant supply chain disruption, but it isn't the first one. It's not the first disruption that we've ever occurred. And we've spent quite a bit of time and effort in trying to solve these problems. Well, here's 6 reasons why that supply chains break. Because we have such a heavy emphasis on our tier 1, we often don't look beyond. So what's happening at the next level, at the tier 2, at the tier 3? Sooner or later, there is a weak link in the chain. Oftentimes we have the assumption that technology is going to solve all of our problems, right? Just by being able to communicate, we'll be able to deal with anything that may come along. Maybe it's that we believe ourselves to be innovative, but because we're working in a supply chain where we have so many partners, and so all of the benefits those partners bring to the table to help us, but for every partner and every strength, there's also an additional weakness. And so do we ever bother to tell our customers that we have actually innovated so that they could keep up? We don't have enough data, or we have too much data. We can sometimes not have what we need to use data to turn into information so that we can make decisions, or maybe we have so much data that we just don't know what to do. We don't have the capability to analyze that data so that we can move forward. And then there's the fragmentation of organizations. Oh, that's a supply chain problem. Oh, that's an engineering problem, or that's an operations problem, or whatever it may be. We have fragmentations of our supply chain, of our organization. We have fragmentation of effort. We sometimes create local optimas to solve local problems that end up having a potential next step impact that can actually do more harm than good. What do we do about it then? Well, we just buy more technology, right? That'll help us solve all of our problems. We'll put a new IT solution. Well, maybe it will. How about we just make process improvement? Whether it be some type of theory of constraints, maybe it is a Six Sigma effort, maybe any type of continuous process improvement effort to help us move to where we need to be. You know what we really do? We need better people. And so we'll train our people, we'll educate our people, we'll hire better people, we'll keep better people, and everything that goes along with it. And maybe that is part of the solution. You know what would help is if we integrate and collaborate more. Maybe if we talk to each other more, that would solve all of our problems. Potentially. You know what? If we just keep a system-wide enterprise view, if we just take on a bigger picture strategy, that'll help us to see where all our problems are. And if we understand that, then we can solve our problems that way. And that may be too. You know what we should do? We should just give up. We should just all quit, and we'll ignore it because the world is flat anyway. Clearly, no single one of these could potentially be the answer to everything, and two maybe aren't options at all. So what can we do about it? What if one argument that we have seen made, and and may have some potential merit is that we should improve our flexibility. And there are many efforts to improve flexibility, but one is to improve our flexibility through actually planning. What can we do? It helps us to, or has been argued that it could help us to minimize risk by actually including a formal planning process, and that leads to increased flexibility. But how could you do that? What components would you maybe want to include? And I'd ask you to take a few seconds to consider that. Which options would you go after first to try to minimize that risk through a formal planning process, thereby increasing your flexibility? And so the question becomes, how do you increase organizational flexibility? We actually argue that flexibility in the supply chain can be found through this definition that you see above, but it's not good enough to increase your own internal organization's flexibility. From a supply chain perspective, we have to take into account our internal capabilities and our external partners, the suppliers, the customers, the third-party companies that we may use, the information systems that we may use. And so we went out and gathered a little data on how and what different types of components might lead to increased organizational capability. So we talked to 400 supply chain planners. We got 168 usable responses, about 42%, which is fairly significant in survey research. What you see here is just a little bit about the demographics of those individuals, and I think it paints the picture for you that these are individuals that have been in the business for a while. They know what they're doing. They're fairly experienced in all forms of planning and supply chain. And what factors did you choose? Just a few moments ago, we proposed these factors. And I'm going to go through very briefly and walk through what the definitions of these are, and then compare them to your list. And I'd ask you to think about as you go, as I define these for you, what impact you believe they might have on this capability called organizational flexibility. So top management support is the first one. Top management support directs the resource allocation. It provides backing and leadership and direction to the organization. It's been argued that it's the key variable to any initiative's success, and without that support, will not develop beyond the initial stages of development. So basically, good thoughts, good plans, good initiatives will die before they have an opportunity to move forward, and it's a must for all management programs. And this one seems like a pretty straightforward argument. The next is goal alignment. And so what goal alignment does is it helps us to ensure that there are multiple components within the organization that are focused on the same or similar outcomes. And in this case, organization can mean within your organization and across the supply chain. Basically, that we have aligned our goals in the direction that we are going to go. And it's important if we're going to ensure system-wide planning efforts. Similarly, resource alignment offers the benefits of joint synergy in a powerful way, it's been argued, to gain competitive advantage. It is what enables an organization to take advantage of their organizational strengths, right? We can bring our resources to bear to find that competitive advantage that we need in the market. And this is true across the board, whether it be private or public companies. And so IT use is the next one, and it's what enables an organization to maintain that information in an accessible format so that it can process its requirements and make both operating and planning decisions. It's also the type of technology or the type of tool that we need to be able to execute on those decisions, and it's been argued that it improves organizational performance across the board. Next is information sharing, very similar in nature, but not exactly the same thing. And it involves more the willingness of the organization to make information available to others. Okay, little key difference there. It establishes our institutional memory, and it's what allows us to learn, anticipate, and to change. And so we could make a strong argument here that it is what allows us to one of the components of organizational flexibility. Again, it's the ability to implement best practices and prevent problems or disruptions in the future. Connectivity reflects the ability of an organization or their networks to communicate directly. It involves the jointly developed information systems between partners, and provides that ability to collect and disseminate and often to utilize information in a timely manner. So it is argued that this is the capability that reduces notification and response time in our ability to react to a disruption, because systems are talking to each other without having to have human interference or interaction. Planning comprehensiveness is the next factor that we argued should be a part of this overall model. It involves the extensive analysis of risk and benefits, the alternatives that might be available, and the communication of those objectives and strategy across a single organization and across supply chain partners. It assists in the configuration and coordination of operations, and it helps to, as it has been argued in research, to increase flexibility. It also increases the ability to process information and organizing resources. So it is tied in somewhat with other portions of the model. Standardization of the process is the thought. The thought behind this is that it establishes common policies and procedures so that we can facilitate that planning process. Basically, are we speaking the same language? Are we planning the same way as we go through? This is a shared knowledge of system-wide capabilities, particularly in this case, the planning process. And it's the explicit and systematic planning. It has been argued that explicit and systematic planning processes have been linked to success and flexibility in many research efforts across the board. And it provides that baseline so that we can handle situations from the norm to the unusual, and the unusual in this case being something like a supply chain disruption. So in this case, we could make a solid argument that planning process standardization, or PPS, would be a significant component of organizational flexibility. And the last two components that we argued in our study was that the internal and external collaboration, internal being within your organization, external being outside of your organization with your supply chain partners. It is the interdependent relationships where parties work closely to create that mutually beneficial outcome. That's important, right? Because if there is not a win in the outcome for everyone, whether that be all of the players internal to an organization or the players external to your organization with your supply chain partners, how can we expect to move towards a common outcome? And so there has to be a win in it for everyone at some point. This results in joint knowledge creation. We can learn from each other. We can learn from each other's mistakes. We can anticipate what the problems may be. I see something that may be a problem for one of my supply chain partners or one of the other components of my organization, and I share that through collaboration so that we can get ahead of the problem before it is in fact a problem. And it has been argued that both forms of collaboration, internal and external, lead to increased flexibility in response to customer needs and to market changes. And in this case, market changes could be the result, or customer needs could be the result of a supply chain disruption. So there you go. That's what the model looks like. It argued that all of these components would somehow would have a positive impact on organizational flexibility. So now I'll ask you, again, we started the conversation and I asked you to think about what types of components might be involved in increasing an organization's flexibility. And then I asked, as we went through the definitions very briefly, for you to kind of think about which ones might be more important and did they match up to your list as we went through. So what happened? Remember, we surveyed 400 supply chain professionals. We had a 42% response rate. Very experienced people were involved. The credible sample, we found in this particular study that top management support, resource alignment, IT use, and external collaboration all positively impacted this thing called organizational flexibility, but our other factors did not. And so then the question would be, why? Well, as we argued in the first place, top management support, nearly all initiatives require this type of support in order to survive. And so it makes sense that in this case too, if we want to increase our organizational flexibility, we're going to have that leadership team support, that senior level leader push in order to get to where we need to be. Resource alignment makes perfectly good sense, as we argued in the first place as well. Without resources, even the best initiatives will fail, even if it makes complete sense to everyone in the organization. If there are no resources behind it, it's likely not going to go very far. IT usage, again, we made a solid argument for why that should be true. Organizations that use some type of standardized IT across and between organizations can react faster, right? And then external collaboration. Organizations that collaborate together with their partners are very often in a situation that can lead to increased flexibility. That all makes perfectly good sense to us. But why did the others not? Well, here we go. As our friend Barney might curiously inquire, how could goal alignment not lead to increased collaboration? And so the problem, increased flexibility. So the problem that we think comes into play here is that while we may all need to have similar goals, different levels of a supply chain, even different organizations within within a single organization, even different components of a single organization may not necessarily be all on board and may not have to be, right? So as long as we have similar goals, that doesn't necessarily mean that all of the goals have to be aligned. This is particularly true in a larger supply chain when many supply chain partners and players are also partners and players in other organizations' supply chain. So maybe it is good enough that we just don't have, maybe our goals are not in opposition to one another is better than it is good enough. So maybe that's the case. Information sharing. Actually, we can find ourselves in a position where we share too much information, where we have so much information that it becomes cumbersome, it becomes confusing. It doesn't have exactly the same value. We can find ourselves in problems with connectivity, in that if we have false assumptions or false data that are bad data that finds its way into our systems, that information is shared between systems without the benefit of a human in the loop, and in some cases, without advances in other technologies such as AI, that bad data can affect everyone equally at the same time. And so we're on the same page, but we're all singing bad music. And so that can lead to really, it can negatively impact our ability to be flexible. Planning comprehensiveness. We argued that it should have a positive impact, but maybe in this case, we can find that we can't plan for everything, and we can find ourselves in a situation of analysis paralysis, in that we're overthinking every potential what if, and we build that into our system, and now that plan is trying to do too much rather than focus on a particular type of problem. Standardization, the same type of thing, in that we want, maybe the case should be, instead of trying to standardize all of the process, we should give basic guidance and direction, and then let organizations execute around that basic guidance. And then finally, internal collaboration actually was a reversed impact. It actually had a negative impact on our organization's flexibility, and there is some logic behind that, in that maybe too much internal collaboration can lead to groupthink. And so we have too much structure, and outside views and opinions are not allowed. Therefore, we lessen our ability to be flexible. So there's the whys and the why nots. And as with any survey, any type of research that we do that involves surveys, sample problems are a common problem. And while in our effort, we made every effort to deal with those known issues, they occasionally do occur. We also know that, that while our study did have a broad spectrum, we were looking across multiple organizations, multiple industries. There's always some impact that could come up or could come about due to industry differences. And then things change over time, right? As technology changes, as opinions change, as different types of organization come about and different agreements are made, things do change over time. What we would ask then is if these factors don't all necessarily impact organizational flexibility, what other factors might be considered? So I hope that you enjoyed our discussion here today. I hope that you maybe took something away from it. I hope that the results of this study reinforce some things that we know, and maybe challenged us to think about how we can increase a capability such as organizational flexibility in a slightly different way. I will be around in the Q&A session later today, and I look forward to the opportunity to discuss with you then your thoughts on this study, your thoughts on the concept of organizational flexibility, and how we might deal with supply chain disruptions. Again, I'm Dr. Ben Skipper at the University of Tennessee, and I look forward to speaking with you in the future. Good luck, stay safe.